Why, hello there, anatomy class. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the physiology of the respiratory system and how it all works. So let's kick it off by just introducing the idea that breathing, fancy word, pulmonary ventilation. Now you know, if you are inspiring, you are breathing in. You're not ready to go and paint a masterpiece, you're just breathing in. Whereas if you're expiring, you're breathing out. You're not dying or anything. Breathing out, that's all. Little recap for a very, very basic scientific term here. Diffusion is when things move down a concentration gradient because there is a higher concentration of whatever that thing is on one side as opposed to the other. And because of passive movement, they will even themselves out. So remember that word is going to be very important for how breathing works. So one thing we have to talk about is that when we're breathing in, when we are inspiring, the reason that breathing happens is purely due to pressure differentials, meaning if there is less pressure inside of you than there is outside of you, air wants to equalize, i.e. diffusion, therefore it's going to move into you. On the other hand, if there's a higher pressure inside of you than there is outside of you, air is going to rush out. So one thing that we just need to mention is that the lungs are obviously very highly involved in breathing, and they have the ability to stretch. And the fancy word for lung stretching is compliance. And there are factors that can cause your lungs to be less compliant. Nothing that we're really going to talk about here, but we do need to mention the fact that it can happen. But for the most part, lungs are just kind of stretching and then compressing, and then stretching and compressing. And that's just kind of what they do. Very much like a balloon. If you were to blow up a balloon and then let the balloon go, it would kind of inflate, deflate, inflate, deflate. Now, the lungs themselves are not going to be involved in the active process of breathing. That goes to this fancy muscle called the diaphragm. And if you are thinking I said that wrong, it's because I did. It's the diaphragm. So the diaphragm is the very, very important muscle found at the bottom of your thoracic cavity that is going to have one job, and that is to control the volume of your thoracic cavity. And of course, your lungs live in the thoracic cavity. So when your diaphragm contracts, what it does is makes your thoracic cavity bigger. And in doing so, it's going to increase the volume of your thoracic cavity. But now we have more space happening inside of the chest. That means that whatever pressure was there has more room now to move around in, and therefore is going to decrease. So when the diaphragm contracts, it increases the volume of the thoracic cavity and decreases the pressure. And when you decrease pressure in relation to the outside world, that is how you breathe in. On the other hand, when you breathe out, it's because your diaphragm relaxes. It causes your thoracic cavity to shrink. And in doing so, causes the pressure inside of your thoracic cavity to increase. And very much, again, like a balloon, it squeezes out the air just through pressure. So that is exhalation, expiration. Now, that's the very basic idea of how it all works, and we're just going to put it together with the idea of measuring different ways, different kinds of breathing. Speaking of breathing, I don't know if you can hear, but my dog is snoring behind me right now, and I'm really hoping you can't hear it because it's obnoxiously loud, but I'm not going to wake her up. I love her. All right, so the idea of measuring breathing has to do with an instrument called a spirometer. And very simply, there's different kinds. I have one that's called a dry spirometer. This is called a wet spirometer. All you do is you breathe into something, and it's able to measure the volume of air that you are either breathing in or out. Usually it's out. So we'll kick it off with the idea of a volume. And all we're going to say for that is the amount of air that is being able to be moved in or out of the lungs. Now, as you are sitting here watching this, you're breathing in, you're breathing out, you're breathing in, you're breathing out. And in doing so, your normal breathing rhythm is exchanging a volume of air called the tidal volume. And there's really nothing too crazy with tidal volume. In fact, when I show you what it looks like on a graph, tidal volume is in, out, in, out, in, out. And that's all it is. You see it's a very, very small range of air moving in and out of the lungs. So what we need to mention now is all of this other empty space. So let's get into that. The other volumes involved with breathing, one is called the ERV, or expiratory reserve volume. And that's going to be the amount of air that you can breathe out after you normally breathe out. Now, this is kind of weird. So notice it's down here. If we're going with tidal volume, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in. When I breathe out, now what I'm going to do is completely empty my lungs as much as I can after that normal tidal volume breath out. So this is going to be kind of weird, but just let me demonstrate. That's it. On the other hand, your inspiratory reserve volume, IRV, is the amount of air you can breathe in after you breathe in normally. So again, let's be weird here. I'm going to breathe in, breathe out, and then I'm going to breathe in, and then I'm going to hold my finger up, and then I'm going to breathe in more. So. And I forgot to hold my finger up, but that's okay, because you kind of get it, hopefully. Residual volume, on the other hand, is the idea that you can never get rid of all of the air in your lungs because you are never reducing that volume into a zero sum. If you ever do lose all the residual volume in your lungs, it's probably because you were either at the bottom of the ocean and the pressure has just crushed you, or you are in the vacuum of space, which has just sucked all the air out of your lungs, and neither one of them are things that you want to do. So what we're going to say is that when we have hit that ERV, again, breathe in, breathe out, breathe all the way out, the amount of air that is in your lungs at the end of your normal at the forceful exhalation, that is your residual volume, and you really can't measure it. It's just kind of there. All right, so those are individual volumes, arguably more important, but we can add some of them up into some things called capacities. Now, I just said the volumes are important, but this is by far the most important one. I mean, it's right there in the name. The vital capacity, the VC, is going to be when we take all of our breathing and add it up. So I like this definition: the largest amount of air that you can move in and out of your lungs. And very simply, that would be if you were to go, you see it's over here on the right side. You breathe out, and then you breathe all the way in, and then you breathe all the way out. That is your vital capacity. In class, I would give you a balloon and say, blow it up. And then we would compare vital capacities, and it would be a fun little activity. But we can't do that because we're not going back to school, which we're not talking about that. Vital capacity, the total amount of air your lungs can breathe in and out. On the other hand, your inspiratory capacity is when we add up your IRV and your TV, meaning right here, your tidal volume and your inspiratory reserve volume. So at the end of a tidal volume, when you breathe out, now you are breathing in normally, and then you're breathing all the way in as much as you possibly can. And you see it over here. It's that total amount of air that you can breathe in outside of the ERV. And lastly, we have, the functional residual capacity, FRC, is when we combine the ERV and RV. So that's going to be the amount of air. Oh, that's an error on my part. That should not be going all the way down, but yet it does. It's all good. Functional residual capacity, meaning the amount of air that you can hold in and use in your lungs, is when you combine your ERV and your RV. That's all. So here it is, and that's your ERV. I'm sorry, FRC. And finally, your total lung capacity, which is something you actually can't really measure because you don't have the instruments to do it, is when you were to take the total amount of air that your lungs can hold. I'm boring myself talking about this, just for the record. So let's move into just the last bit, which are reflexes. And I found pictures that are just absolutely not paid actors who are taking stock photos to post on the internet. These are people who are actually going through these reflexes. So the first thing we'll just say is a cough is when you have something blocking your airway, usually in your trachea or your bronchi, And in order to dislodge it and move it up and out, you cough. It's a forceful exhalation that's going to forcefully get that stuck object, or in some cases mucus, up and out of the way. That's all. That guy, definitely coughing. A sneeze, on the other hand, is when you now have something stuck in your nasal cavity that you need to get rid of, be it pollen or extra snot or pet dander. Similar in function to a cough, but now you are blowing air out of your nose, and that's clearing your nose. I looked up hiccup picture, and there is not a single good hiccup picture, so I just picked the first one I saw. But a hiccup is when your diaphragm, which normally is just doing its thing, in and out, in and out, in and out, contract, relax. Something is just kind of there that messes with it. It causes it to just kind of like spasm a little bit. And in doing so, it causes you to breathe in and out real fast and is really annoying. And yeah, that's it. That's about it. I know for me, I'm a big spicy food guy. And when I eat really spicy food, even though I love it, I will, if I kind of just dive right in, I'll start to hiccup. If I work my way up, I can generally avoid it. But something about the spiciness and the way that it triggers different nerves, it just causes me to hiccup. And it's something that some people have. Yeah, that's it. Hiccups, annoying. And finally, yawn. Yep, you just yawn, I know. Is just something we do. We don't really know why, but we do believe that it has something to do with the fact that when we yawn, it's generally because we are going into a state of low awareness. And in order to raise our awareness, we are going to yawn. And that kind of tells our body, hey, maybe there's a bear that we need to be able to fight. On the other hand, some other social cues that the yawn is very important in communicating, especially because, again, yawns are kind of contagious, is that, oh gosh, has that been up there the whole time? No. Jeez. I think I have music playing in the background. I'm hoping it's not actually playing. That would be something. But, all right, so when you see someone yawn and you want to yawn, it's because you are observing someone who is communicating to you by saying, hey, I'm really not that aware right now. Just, you need to know that. Because if a bear walks in the room, I might not be that big of a help. So that's generally why when one person yawns, you have half the room yawn, because they are communicating to each other. This might not be the best time for me, so can you just carry me until I'm ready to go? And that's kind of a neat idea, that we have these nonverbal cues that are very, very important. So much so that the yawn is not a human thing. I mean, obviously you have your mammals, different adorable little mammals here yawning, but if you see your dog yawn, odds are you might yawn. And there's actually evidence that if you go up to your dog and start yawning, your dog might yawn back. If you do decide to test that out, because I mean, what else are you going to do, right? Take a video, because that could be awesome. Picture you yawning at your dog and your dog yawns back. It's like you're talking to your dog. All right, and the idea here that I just need to finish with, and I'm really hoping this is it. I know this is a very long slideshow, but we're just going to finish here. When we breathe in is obviously we have a reason that we're breathing in. It's because we need to get oxygen into our body, and the oxygen goes into our lungs, into our bloodstream, and then travels throughout the body. Likewise, we need to get rid of carbon dioxide, which is being produced through cellular respiration in places like your muscles, carried through the blood to your lungs. We need to get rid of that because we don't want that. It's a waste product. And all of that is involved with the respiratory membrane, which I had mentioned in the anatomy slide, which is the total surface area of your alveoli and the surface that they contact the circulatory system. So what we see here, and it's really hard to tell, but imagine that's like a cup. And that cup, those are all of the little capillaries that are surrounding an alveoli. And you can kind of just, I don't know, I can't stick my finger in there. That'd be silly. But imagine if you were to stick your hand into that and just let it kind of surround your hand. And your hand, again, was the alveoli. That would allow for any gases in the blood to get out of the blood and into your lungs, and vice versa. And that's the respiratory membrane. That's the thing that's as big as a tennis court. And the reason that gases go into you and out of you is very simply because of diffusion. When you breathe in, the atmosphere we breathe in is roughly 21% oxygen. Some of that goes into your body, and that's because there's a higher concentration in the air than there is inside of your body. Very simple diffusion. There's no active transport involved there. Likewise, with carbon dioxide, there's more of it in your body than there is in the air. Carbon dioxide is a trace gas in the atmosphere, so there's going to be a very easy diffusion out of your body and into the atmosphere and into the world. The way that the rate that you are able to get oxygen into your body depends on several factors. If there's more oxygen available in the air you're breathing, obviously it's going to be able to get more into your body. That's why sometimes you see the linebackers when they run a touchdown for 100 yards in a football game, they go over to the sideline and they start sucking down oxygen tanks, and that's because they need to get back out on the field. But the oxygen that they are breathing in is a higher concentration than they would breathe out normally or breathe in normally. Therefore, they can recuperate somewhat faster. The surface area of your respiratory membrane is going to be kind of a indirect way to change the rate of oxygen diffusion. Just think of it like this. If you have one lung, you will not be as good at breathing as if you had two lungs. If we had three lungs, you'd be better at breathing than just having two. We don't have three lungs, though. Breathing slower or faster, and the amount of air you breathe in is obviously going to affect how much oxygen you get into your body. And finally, a concept called alveolar ventilation, which I'm going to talk about now. That has to do with the idea that when you breathe in, not all of that air that you actually breathe in makes it to the respiratory membrane. Some of it gets stuck in the bronchi, some of it gets stuck in the trachea, and all of that air that doesn't quite make it to the place where it's supposed to do a job is called dead air. And that is what alveolar ventilation is. So if you have a high rate of dead air, you will not get as much oxygen as if you had a lower rate. So that's all. Something that can affect how much oxygen you get in your body. A couple other just examples here. Excuse me. If you go up in altitude, let's say we fly out to Colorado, to Denver, the Mile High City, there's less oxygen at altitude than there is at sea level. And that's one of the reasons why the Olympic Training Center is in Boulder, Colorado, because you have all these athletes going and training in low oxygen environments. Their bodies are going to get used to working under low oxygen environments. And then if they come compete at sea level where there is more oxygen, they have an advantage because they are just better at dealing with oxygen than someone who has only trained at sea level. People who have diseases or respiratory issues are obviously not going to be able to move air as efficiently. I'll talk about emphysema a little bit later. And another just example here, if you take a drug like morphine or really any opiate, heroin, same thing, that slows down your rate of respiration. And it's not something that you are really aware of. If you've ever been on a painkiller of any kind, you might have been given a little device by your doctor. And what they want to do is give you this little thing that you breathe into several times a day, that you have to take deep breaths, because that painkiller, if it's an opiate-based painkiller, is going to reduce the depth of your breath. And the reason that's a bad thing is because that can allow fluid to accumulate in your lungs and lead to pneumonia. So they give you this little device you breathe into, just take a couple deep breaths, and it's sort of something that we do normally, but when we take the opiate, it stops that from happening. And just on a real quick aside, when someone does overdose on an opiate drug, the main cause of death for those people is they stop breathing, because something about that drug depresses the brain and tells the brain it does not need to breathe. So that's where the issues for those things arise. So if you recall, when we talked about the brain, breathing is a very vital function. It's like your heart rate, it's like your blood pressure. It just needs to happen. So it's happening in the brainstem. The reptilian part of the brain, if you will. We do have chemoreceptors that can sense chemicals, and in particular carbon dioxide, throughout our body. And if there's a high concentration of carbon dioxide somewhere, it tells us we need to breathe. And I know I've mentioned this in class before, but we don't feel the need to breathe if we have low oxygen. We only feel the need to breathe if we have high carbon dioxide. And that can lead to a whole slew of issues that I'm not going to mention now. So, this is, I promise, the last thing. Normal breathing, eupnea. Eu means true. Nia in this case is in reference to breathing. This is what you're doing right now, unless you are consciously thinking about your breathing, in which case, I'm sorry. But normal breathing, 12 to 17 breaths per minute, that's just what you are doing. Now, there are reasons that you might start to hyperventilate. Like if you were to go exercise, that's going to cause your rate of respiration to increase, and therefore you will begin to hyperventilate. There's other things that can cause hyperventilation, like and anxiety that can cause hyperventilation, or even just you want to hyperventilate and you start to that's hyperventilation as well. And finally, hypoventilation is when you start to sort of slow down your breaths. Again, that can be a conscious thing, or maybe that's in reference to the drugs that I've mentioned earlier. And apnea is when you stop breathing. Again, you can do it consciously. If you hold your breath, you are now stopping breathing, and you are going to sort of hold that until you start breathing again. But that word apnea is most commonly utilized when you put the word sleep in front of it, because some people have a condition called sleep apnea, where during the night they just stop breathing, and they will then hopefully start breathing again. But as you can probably imagine, there's lots of things that can go wrong when someone stops breathing for extended periods of time, and they're unaware of it. So there's sleep doctors that will help you out with sleep apnea. And the thing that's near and dear to my heart here is asthma, where because I have it, the asthma is when the muscles in your bronchi, those smooth muscles that are helping to regulate the airflow, they just start to freak out a little bit. It's kind of like a hiccup for your bronchi, but by slamming shut, they are reducing the amount of air that can now travel to the lungs and the alveoli and the respiratory membrane. So what people like me need to do are take drugs, where we take inhalers, or we take oral medicines that are going to help to calm down that spasm, calm down that inflammation, and now allow us to breathe. Severe asthma attacks can cause death. So obviously I don't want to just have an asthma attack and die. I want to stay alive. So I take my medicine the way I should, and it's all about management. Emphysema, I told you I would talk about it. This is something that you can get if you're a chronic smoker. You smoke for a long time, but it's not the only way. It's just a common way. But what generally happens is the alveoli start to get bigger. Now, you might be thinking, wow, that's awesome. Alveoli getting bigger, that's going to allow for more oxygen to get into the alveoli, and then more oxygen can get into the bloodstream, and that's just a win-win-win-win-win. But the problem is the alveoli are like a balloon, and you can blow them up and blow them up and blow them up, but at some point, they're going to pop. And if you now have an alveoli rupture and break, it's going to repair itself with scar tissue. And we need simple squamous epithelial tissue in the alveoli, but if we replace it with connective tissue, one of these things is not like the other. That function is not going to be what it needs to be. So therefore, someone with emphysema has lost lung function. And this, I promise, is my last slide. If you move into a new house, it's going to have a carbon monoxide detector, and hopefully you have one in your house right now. But one of the things that is a very scary idea is we can be in the presence of this gas, carbon monoxide, which is odorless, colorless. We have no idea it's around us. But what it does when you breathe it in is it outcompetes oxygen in hemoglobin. So if you recall, each hemoglobin molecule can bind to 4 oxygens, but carbon monoxide is now going to start kicking out the oxygens and taking their spots. So now you have red blood cells circulating around the body that don't have oxygen attached to them. And obviously that's going to be a bad thing, because now your oxygen levels are going to start going down. And one of the first symptoms of carbon monoxide exposure is just fatigue. very much like something like anemia, where someone doesn't have enough red blood cells to carry oxygen, so they are going to start to feel tired. But the thing with carbon monoxide is, again, you don't really know you're exposed to it. And if it's a chronic thing, that can add up over the course of time, and that can cause other issues. In a severe case, if someone is exposed to carbon monoxide, it can actually cause them to essentially suffocate. Even though they are breathing normally, they're going to start to just run out of oxygen. And again, you're not going to feel out of breath because the carbon dioxide levels aren't going up. You're still breathing normally. It's just that you are not getting the oxygen you need in your body. So again, very, very important that we have ways to detect this gas so that way you don't expire. All right, that was 25 minutes and longer than I would have liked, but had to be done because breathing, as we can agree, is pretty important. Now, before I go, you might have mentioned, noticed that my fresh cut style in here, I took my clippers out and gave myself the quarantine haircut, and it's not completely even, but what are you gonna do? Because I couldn't wear a hat, and I'm a hat guy outside, so my big bushy hair was just in combination with my massive head was just too much for my hat, so I just cut it, and yeah, it's my new look. Um, yeah, that's all. We'll talk more about something else next week, but for now, that was it. Respiration. See you guys.